Yes, thank you so much for coming tonight. If you weren't able to make it to my mindfulness presentation, I forgot to hit record on that one, but I do have the slide deck with some linked resources. So let me know if you're interested in getting that slide deck. I don't have as many resources for this one because this is a lot more informational, and there aren't quite as many, I think, behavior resources out there as there are mindfulness, but there are some things that are linked in here too. So I really wanted to talk about discipline. I know that, usually I'm doing a lot of work in the class and in the school, and students are at home right now. And so wanted to be able to equip you with tools and give you some ways to respond to misbehavior. It's something that our teachers do with kids a lot during the school day. And now you're kind of stepping in, and it's a weird middle ground, right? Because you're the parent, but you're also kind of stepping in as teacher. And so I've heard some parents that are just like, I'm not quite sure what to do. What's my role? How do I do this? And how do I keep everyone happy when stress levels are so high? So the one thing to keep in mind is that there isn't a one size fits all approach to discipline. Every family's different, every kid's different, all the dynamics are different. So it might be like a case of trial and error. I definitely recommend you pick a strategy, try it for a couple of weeks. As we know, it takes 21 days to form a new habit. So we really want to let time for the change to sink in and for the routine to become apparent before we kind of give up hope. Trying something for a day or two isn't necessarily going to be helpful. So, try something, give it a couple of weeks. And then if it really seems like nothing's working, then you switch it up. So before we start, I just want to let you know, yes, we're recording. I'm going to share it. Your camera can be on or off. It's up to you. I won't take it personal if your camera's off. Please stay on mute if you can. If you have a question, go ahead and type it into the chat box. I've got Dr. Marburger here with me, and he's going to help moderate a little bit for me since I'm multitasking with the presentation. So yeah, Dr. Marburger's here. He can help out. Otherwise I'll be chatting away over here. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Amanda Giordano. I'm the school counselor at Nettlehurst. This is my 4th year with the school, and I'm loving it and adapting along with everybody else to the changes this year. So to get us started, I know that the focus of this is positive discipline, but a lot of times when we think about discipline, we think of punishment, right? That's the first thing that comes to mind. Even when you talk to kids and you talk about consequences, they always think about like, oh, consequence, like something bad, punishment. So we are going to look at punishment just to create something to like a jumping off point to highlight the differences between punishment and positive discipline. So just reflect, and this is an activity just for you, and see if you can think of a time when you were punished by your parents when you were little. And it could be something small, it could be something big. Just like really recall that event. And then think about how you felt. What were the emotions that punishment evoked for you? Would you say that you were ashamed? Were you angry? Were you scared? Were you happy? I mean, proud, whatever feelings ran through your head. And then think about, did that experience of being punished, did it inspire you to change your behavior? Did it lead to any lasting change? And then kind of contemplate why or why not. And then also think about how that impacted your relationship with adults, right? So how did that impact your relationship with the parent that was punishing you? So when we think about punishment, it's punitive discipline. There are a lot of pitfalls to that, right? So if we were to kind of define it, if we take a closer look at punitive discipline, we realize that it's defining behavior as breaking a rule or disobeying authority. It relies on an authority figure, so an adult, to figure out what's broken. So you're pointing out like, oh, you're not supposed to run in the hall. You're supposed to be quiet during, study times. You're supposed to put the chores away. So the adult saying what's wrong and then figuring out who's to blame. And accountability, it comes in the way of receiving punishment. So in punitive discipline, the child is held accountable once they've received a punishment. The goal of punitive discipline is for that unpleasantness to inspire change, right? So I don't want that unpleasant thing to happen again. So I guess I'll do what I'm supposed to. But the effects are short term in that. Punishment, there are a lot of pitfalls to punishment. So we can see it doesn't address any of the underlying behaviors. It doesn't address any of the underlying problems, right? It's not looking at teaching skills. It's not giving any ownership to the child, right? The adult is in charge of the whole process. And so it's not an authentic learning experience for a child if we're just punishing them. Some of the other problems with punishment, if you choose a punishment that isn't harsh enough that the child doesn't respond to, then you're kind of stuck with, well, you have to give harsher and harsher punishments for it to be effective. And then harsh punishments can actually backfire and lead to more misbehavior in children, studies have shown. And then when we use harsh punishment, it can cause children either to learn to fear situations, or it can also, on the opposite end, make them turn aggressive towards others when there are problems, when there's something that upsets them, because it's modeling, right? How we discipline our children is modeling how our children will then respond to problems. So punitive discipline is just problematic for a lot of reasons. So we're going to switch gears then with that lens and that understanding of punishment and some of the problems. We're going to examine some ways that you can have some positive discipline experiences with your child. So I've broken it down into a couple of steps that we'll go through, and then I've got some resources for you. So first step is you have to be proactive, right? So you really need to foster a connection with your child. You need to establish trust with your child. And you can do that with, playing together with them, doing things that they like with older children. Just create that bond between them so that they trust you and that they know that you're on their side, right? They feel like you're in their corner and that you're not just the person that's there to call them out when they're misbehaving. And then you also really want to work with your child on building self-regulation skills. So we want to be preventative, right? So if we know that a kid's always getting upset when they're frustrated with work, and if schoolwork is too hard and then they melt down, well, we just need to develop some coping skills there. So, okay, learn to ask for help, or learn to take some deep breaths, recognize the signs that you're upset. What are your body signs? Are you hot? Are you sweaty? Do you feel like a buzzing in your body? So really teach those self-regulation skills and model them too. It's never hurtful to be open with your feelings. And if you're frustrated by something, say, I'm really frustrated that this didn't work. I'm going to take a couple deep breaths. And you're really verbally modeling that for the child, just so they're hearing you say the words, and maybe they can internalize that self-talk, right? Just so they know how to practice these skills, and it can prevent some misbehavior. So we can kind of cut down on having to discipline as much. Another thing that you can do to kind of, again, be proactive and curb misbehavior before it begins is to offer choices. So when we offer kids choices, it gives them ownership. So let your kid pick whether they want to have snack before or after they have to do a chore. Maybe they're really, really hungry. And if you let them have their snack now, they won't throw a tantrum in the middle of cleaning up, right? But they have that ownership then, and it gives them a little bit more confidence in what they're doing. And you can also and we want structured choices, right? So we don't want to just say like, oh, what do you want to have for snack? Give two choices that are both positive choices for the kid. So maybe you want to give them an option between apples and carrots because those are their favorites. Don't give them the whole world to choose from. Structure some choices for them. And then they feel like they're a partner in the process, and there's that sense of ownership again. And then you really want to be consistent, right? So you have to establish a rule, and that has to be the rule all the time. And you have to follow through on what you say what you're saying you're going to do. Because if you say, you know, I'm so bad at coming up with examples on the spot, but if you outline, okay, if you do this, then this will be the consequence, and you don't do it, well, the kid's not going to know when you're going to actually hold them to that, right? And it can become unpredictable, and it can be scary, and they can try to push the limits. So you have to be consistent, and you have to be forthcoming too. So they have to know what the consequences are ahead of time. You can't surprise them out of the blue, or they're going to argue that it's unfair. And you can actually work with them to establish those. So, you know, hey, what do you think is the right kind of consequence for when I ask you to clean up your toys, but you don't? What would be fair to you? You know, and you can work through that with them. And then again, you're giving them that ownership. They become part of the process, and it's not so much a top-down type situation. So then speaking of those, you know, establishing consequences, we want to think about what are consequences? How do we build consequences for our child that aren't punitive? So that leads us to step 2. So when we think about consequences, like I said earlier, when I ask kids about consequences, they are always like, oh, you get punished. And that's what comes to mind a lot. And that could look like losing a privilege. You lose your iPad time. You lose your chance to go to the park, right? But consequences are just anything that happens next. A consequence can be positive. So we think of rewards. So, you know, when you finish your work, then you get to play your favorite game for 10 minutes. So consequences aren't negative. It's just whatever happens next, and it can be positive too. And you really do need to have both of those. You need to have consequences that are positive, and you need to have consequences that are negative. It just needs to be balanced. And again, make sure that you establish those consequences ahead of time with your child if you can. It'll be smooth. The child will know what to expect. We all like consistency. We all like predictability, right? And so do our kids. And so if they know the consequence ahead of time, it won't be a shock when they're receiving that consequence in the moment, right? When they're maybe are already upset, and then a surprise consequence escalates the situation. So when it comes to choosing what the consequences are, you want them to be logical, okay, as much as you can. So that means that whatever consequence you pick should relate to the behavior, and it should never be something that shames or punishes your child. You know, we want it to be something that helps them correct their mistake or take responsibility for their actions. So, you know, maybe if your child is just really not listening to what you're telling them to do next, their logical consequences, you know, they have to sit quietly until they can demonstrate that they're ready to listen, right? And that makes sense. So running around not paying attention, a logical consequences, show me that you can pay attention and you can sit quietly. Another really easy example is if they make a mess and they're ready to go on to their next thing. You know, they were just playing with a whole bin of Legos and now they want to run over and work on a puzzle. The logical consequences, you have to clean up your Legos first before you go play a puzzle. It wouldn't make sense to say, if you don't clean up your Legos, then you don't get any brownies later. They're not related at all. And so it's not a logical consequence. So the consequence has to relate back to the behavior as much as possible. There are going to be situations that come up where that doesn't happen. And then again, you really have to follow through. If you're inconsistent, then you're showing your child that the misbehavior isn't a big deal, right? If you only correct it some of the time, then some of the time it mustn't be a problem. And some of the time it might actually be okay for me to behave this way. I know that's hard. I know it gets tiring, but it really is the most effective way. You know, for anybody who's like tried training a dog, even, you know, you have to like every time for them to really catch on. And this really is kind of just like psychology, like that kind of behavioral psychology. Consistent reinforcement is the most effective. So stay strong and keep at it. And then even after you've been proactive and you've established all these consequences, there's still going to be times when your child misbehaves. Misbehavior is inevitable, right? And so Step 3 is going to be talking about addressing misbehavior in the moment. I know that now more than ever, we're all like starting our days at a 9 on the stressed out scale. And so the littlest thing pushes us to 10. But we have to remember we're modeling for our child, and they're going to feed off of our reactions. So as much as you can, stay calm in the moment, even if that means you have to self-talk your way through, I'm going to take a deep breath because I'm upset, right? And that's fine. Again, it's modeling for your child effective self-regulation and coping skills. So you want to make sure that you're using a neutral voice, right? You're not yelling. You want to try and just keep really neutral, calm body language. It shows that you're in control of the situation too. And then just, remember that all behavior is communication. So when your child is making a poor behavior choice, think about what your child is trying to get, right? What is that behavior saying? So if they're throwing their papers off of their desk in the middle of a class, are they saying that they need a break? Are they saying that their brain is just fried in that moment? Are they saying that they're hungry because they haven't had their snack? And so when we think about that punitive discipline, just telling the kid, you're supposed to keep your papers on the table. You're not supposed to throw them on the ground. Pick them up. We're not getting to the root, but stopping to connect the behavior to their needs. You can start to give them some skills to deal with what's going on and help them understand their behavior. And that's going to lead to that longer term change. And you're also going to avoid embarrassment and shame. When you partner up with them, it's a much more positive interaction. And then remember, you're addressing behavior, right? Not the child. You can let your child know that you love them. You just don't approve of their behavior. And I think that that's important for some kids to really hear explicitly. You know that in your heart, but sometimes a kid just needs to hear, I absolutely love you. I just don't like the decision that you made. And we need to work through that together. And that helps protect their self-esteem. It helps keep them from feeling ashamed, right? We don't want our kids ever to feel ashamed. And also to that point, work through your child's behavior in private as much as possible, which, now that we're home all the time, I guess that's a little bit easier. And you're on the same team. So it's really about working together, creating that partnership as much as possible, offering all of those options for choice. Our kids are still trying to figure out how to manage their emotions. Their brains are developing so quickly that they need time to make sense of all of it. And so they really do need a partner, right? They don't understand why they do the things they do sometimes. And we just need to help lead them to making some positive choices. So taking it a step further in addressing behavior or misbehavior in the moment, there are some tips for how to have those conversations with your child, right? When you're ready to have that conversation in private, or if you have a little bit more time for that conversation, there are some good ways to do it, and then there's some bad ways, right? So I'm pulling from restorative justice practices, and so and that's something that we at CPS really try to use with our students as a first step towards addressing behavior. So again, for that juxtaposition, in punitive conversations, it would be a top down. It would be, what did you do? Why would you do that? And we can kind of feel the shame in those statements. You never listen, do you? And again, you're not asking the kid for anything. You're telling the kid, you never listen. You know what happens now, don't you? I don't know, maybe they don't, right? Sometimes making demands, like, don't you talk to me like that? Diagnosing, the problem with you is that you're disrespectful, or thinking that they deserve to be punished, they deserve to have a consequence, a negative consequence, right? None of those are productive. But if we shift to a restorative conversation approach, we're placing relationships at the middle, right? And we're talking about harm and repairing harm. And like I said, punitive discipline is really a top down, and the adult has all of the power in the situation. Restorative conversation makes it more of a partnership, and places a lot more ownership on the child, right? So you go through these 4 questions. What happened? right? Even if you think you know what happened, it'll give you an opportunity to get inside your kid's mind. What was their thought process? Was there a faulty thought that you can just help them correct, right? Were they trying to do the right thing and they just problem solved it in a really unfortunate way? Were they just super frustrated and didn't know how to voice it? So we can't assume that we know. So we start with what happened. What were you thinking at that time, right? Get them in that moment, thinking about their thought process, retracing their steps so you can really understand where they're coming from. Who or what was affected by this? It is so much more work for a kid to have to figure all of this out. And in a way, this is also like the consequence in and of itself, just having this conversation, right? Instead of us telling the kid, like, well, you hurt your brother's feelings when you stole the game away from him and told him that he was a loser and so that it was your turn to play. Well, maybe the kid needs to put that together, right? And it's kind of hard for a kid to sit and like, oh, well, I guess I made my brother feel bad. It's hard. Some kids will really struggle through this process because they have to own what they did and put two and two together. They have to practice empathy and put themselves in the other person's shoes. And then what do you need to do to make things right? Again, you're giving it to the child and they're figuring out how to fix things. And I mean, it's a little bit easier, right? Like you're not stuck with finding all the consequences all the time. Maybe the kid will need a little bit of help, a little bit of prompting. That's okay. And sometimes you'll get a kid who's resistant and says, I don't need to fix anything. There wasn't anything broken. There wasn't any harm done. And you can just reframe it. Okay, if you were to tell someone else what to do in this type of situation, what could they do to fix it? And you'd be surprised how often that trick works. So again, this is the restorative conversation piece. It's great. It's collaborative. It doesn't shame. It puts ownership on the child, but also it gives you insight into any kind of faulty thinking or coping skills that they have. It encourages problem solving and skill teaching. It acknowledges healing and repairing things instead of just taking away or doling out a negative consequence. So I highly recommend, I'm gonna send this to you. I highly recommend that you maybe print this and like tuck the restorative questions somewhere, write them down, type them in your phone until they become second nature. Of course, it's not gonna work in every situation, but it's a really, really helpful tool to have. And then the last piece that I have, called it diagnosing and treating misbehavior. So thinking about, like I said earlier, what is the behavior? What is the goal of behavior? Why is that behavior there? Because all behavior is communication. There are three main goals for misbehavior generally. There's always going to be outliers, but attention is a huge goal. Access to something is another goal, and then avoiding something else. So once you figure out what the goal is, you can go through and figure out what kind of skills do I need to teach. Like if the kid is, again, throwing the papers off of the desk, they're probably trying to either avoid frustration or avoid just maybe feeling inadequate. And so you need to teach them to ask to take a break. That would be much more productive, right? I need 5 minutes to just like defuzz my brain. Way better than them just pushing everything off of their desk, ripping papers up, okay? And then there are some strategies that you can avoid. Don't ignore them, if don't give them a timeout. If they throw a fit and toss everything off the desk, giving them a timeout is giving them exactly what they want because they're getting out of their work. So that's a strategy that's going to backfire. Don't take away the thing that's too hard because again, you're giving them exactly what they want. You're just feeding into the behavior. And so you're going to help them establish that pattern. They're going to learn, okay, well, if I want to get out of it, I just throw a big enough fit that mom's going to go put me in my room. Dad's going to tell me to go, sit on the couch by myself until I'm ready to come back to it. Access to something, you want to be able to teach them appropriate ways to access what they want. Teach when, then. And notice it's not if then, right? We don't want to give them the option. If you do this, then you get that, especially if it's something that you're already expecting of them. When you put away your dishes, then you can go play your game, right? It's taking the choice out of it. It's clearly stating the steps that they have to take to get what they want. And then, you don't want to just cave and give them what they want. Again, you're reinforcing their behavior. If they know that they can just flail on the floor in the middle of a grocery store and get a candy bar, you can bet that that's what they're going to do when they want a candy bar in the store the next time you go. And then getting attention, we really need to show some healthy ways to get attention, appropriate ways to get attention, polite volume, tone, ask once and wait. And it's really, really hard, but planned ignoring is the best for a child whose misbehavior is all about getting attention. Avoid eye contact, avoid verbal prompts. You say it once and then you totally ignore them. It's basically the silent treatment. But I've seen it work wonders in situations. So just a nice little chart summary, for some tools. Again, this isn't going to apply to all behavior that you see all the time, but these are some good general rules and just some reference points for you. So let me come over here and see if there are any questions. When then. Super. Yeah, go ahead. Ryan.
Right. So I have a kindergartner and a younger child, and I think I jumped the gun with this too much, but they are now not accepting each other's apologies. When one says, "I'm sorry," then the other one says, "Well, I don't accept your apology." So, which partly because it kind of started because I was trying to get them to give genuine apologies as opposed to just saying, "I'm sorry," because mommy said to say, "I'm sorry." So do you have any suggestions about how to handle that, with both children, given that they're both very young? But in general, I mean, most apologies should really be accepted by the sibling. Any thoughts?
Well, I have to differ with you on that. I actually don't think that apologies have to be accepted. And in fact, I teach that we have to be okay with accepting non-closure, right? Because just saying sorry doesn't actually take away the hurt or the pain immetally. They might need to reflect on it, and maybe they're just being petty like that.
I just think that they're too young to get this concept.
Totally.
So, at this point, and I think I jumped the gun, and it's probably a concept more appropriate for, a 6, 7 and up, not 5 and 3.
Yeah.
So any thoughts?
Another thing that you could try is not just an apology, "I'm sorry," but "I'm sorry, next time I will." So that way they're telling them what they're going to do different. That's not going to, annoy or hurt or whatever. Because "I'm sorry" is it's just 2 words, right?
Right.
It doesn't mean that there's going to be change, but "I'm sorry that I snatched the puzzle out of your hands. Next time I'll ask if you're done, or next time I'll wait until you're finished, or next time I'll ask if I can do the puzzle with you."
Okay, that's helpful. And I have one other question. One of the problems we have with our kindergartner is doing the asynchronous learning from 8 to 9. She gets very excited about it and really into the screen. And then there is an utter temper tantrum right going into morning meeting at 9 a.m. when it's time to turn off the asynchronous. So my question for you is, how do we manage this, knowing that there's certain requirements by the school, but at the end of the day, it's still just too much screen time for, a 5-year-old?
Yeah. I think there are a couple of things that you can do. I think that having visuals, especially for the younger the child, having visuals as much as possible is really helpful. So whether that's you set a timer that they can see, and so they know the countdown until class starts, it might not completely erase it, but it might ease that transition, especially because young kids don't have a good grasp of the concept of time, right? I mean, I don't either as an adult, but setting some kind of visual timer. There are fun sand timers that you can buy, but but there's also an online stopwatch website that has all sorts of really fun timers that some of the teachers are using for their breaks. I think Miss Giroux is using them for her breaks, that have like cartoony bomb where the fuse blows, burns down, or animal races. I think the other thing too is like advocate for breaks, teaching your child to advocate for a break, like set the expectation. I know it's a long day, and I know that you get antsy. So you get, one, and you can structure this, right? You don't want to leave it open-ended. You get 1 3-minute break, and you make a 3-minute break card, and you give it to your kid, and then, they can cash it in, but they know, and they've got this visual, then this is my one. I know that it's a 3-minute break, and then I have to come back. And maybe even having a visual schedule with like the pictures of what their day looks like. And again, bring your kid into that process. Let them pick the pictures. Maybe they want a picture of their favorite character or whatever, if you can find one, sitting at a table looking studious for their study time. And then they want to pick something else for their asynchronous time or their lunch. And then they can have something that they even move along through the schedule, so they know where they're at, and then they're the one that's moving it along. That could help with some of the transitions. My lips are sealed, Erica. Yeah, I think that, the asynchronous, you can use the time as you need to. We're very understanding about that. And yeah, you do what you need to do during the asynchronous time.
Does the school have other, I mean, maybe this is more of an appropriate question for the specific teacher or for the grades, but of other activities that are not screen and other kinds of, I don't know, learning activities that, because they still need to learn things, but just that could be done not on screen, and just completely skip all of these asynchronous tools that I understand the school's, providing these for people, but are there other sources that way we still stay on task in terms of trying to learn that would be non-computer that could be, accessible?
Right. Yeah, I know that last year there were packets that the district was making, and this year they've moved away from that. And I know that some teachers have put together packets of paper materials for students, or some grades have like paper workbooks. I don't know. And Dr. Marburger and I are doing some student voice groups with the older kids, so we can get a little bit of feedback, and I can bring that feedback to the administration too, that it would be great to have some offline things for students to do. And I don't know, as not being a teacher, I don't know the full background on it. I know some things that they do online are good for tracking where students are, helping gauge what their ability levels are, things like that. But yeah, I can definitely give the feedback of, getting some paperwork.
Great, thank you.
And we've got a mix too, where we've got some parents that are like, please no paper, because I can't be there. My kid can't do it. I don't know. It's not, they're not self-sufficient enough. And so it's trying to find this happy medium. I'm going to go up. So is it a good idea for the kids to pick their own punishment? So I think it is great to include them as a partner and redirect them if they pick something that just doesn't seem on the mark, right? If they're trying to buy the easy way out, you can say, you know what, let's try that again. I'm not sure that that's the right kind of, I don't want to say punishment, but I don't think that's the right thing for this situation, the right consequence for this situation, and just help guide them through that. I think that that's a great learning experience for a kid too, to figure out what is the appropriate consequence for different behaviors. Let's see. Any suggestions on addressing minor lies? I think it's a healthy call out. Can we try that again? I'm going to ask again, and let's, do you want to think about your answer? I think if they're not necessarily harming anyone, especially right now, that's a hard one to say. Kids have so much on their plates, everyone does, that if they're trying to sneak out of like a little thing here or there. If it turns into this is a perpetual, like this, they're always lying about things, so they start to lie about everything, that's where you want to step it up and address it a little bit more. But I think, I'm not sure that's the truth. Let's try that again. It's really non-judgmental. You're not telling them that they're lying. You're kind of giving it to them to retry. A good question. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I really, really appreciate all of you coming and spending time with me. Your time is very precious. And so, especially when we've got nice weather for maybe the last time this month. So thank you for being here. Thank you for everything that you do for your families, because it's so hard. So hard now more than ever. If you need anything, you can email me. My email address is there. You can set up an appointment with me. My Calendly link is there. You can see my availability and sign up for an appointment. Oh, I think I missed one. Do you have any suggestions for a kid that hits when told no? I think that it's a reinforcing your expectations and then coming up with the consequence together, like when you are, and I think we have to build that empathy too, right? When we think about, so what do they want when they hit you after you say no? They're trying to gain access to something. And so, we just need to help them ask appropriately for what they want, and say, when you stop hitting me, then we'll talk about it. Or, whatever. It's hard to say, depending on the situation, what they want, if it's something that they can actually get or not in the moment. There's so many variables. But, I would come back to this, access, teach them politely, teach that expectation that when you ask politely for something that you can have, then you'll get it. Or tell them when they can have what it is that they want. It's hard. It can be a really broad question, because it depends on what they were trying to gain access to. So, all right. Well, if nothing else, then that's it for tonight. I will email you the slide deck, and then my email address, my Calendly are both linked, and then the slide that has the link to my Google site is also linked right to the section that has all of my coping and mindfulness and feelings resources. There are some links to read alouds of different feelings books, probably more appropriate for the younger and not necessarily middle school age, and all sorts of activities and things. So thank you so much. Be in touch. I appreciate you coming out. And I'm happy to help. Look forward to seeing you at my upcoming anxiety in kids, and then confidence and self-esteem. And then I have some more that I might do in Q2, but I'll email and post on Facebook. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a great night. I'll put my contact information up here again, just in case.